And so now I'm very pleased to introduce Eric Matson, Assistant Professor in Computer and Information Technology. His research focuses on software engineering and development, sensors, sensor networks, robotics, artificial intelligence, and its applications. Today he will present a talk titled, "Will Robots Ensure Our Safety or Place Us at Risk?" If you have any questions at the end, please ask them into the microphone at the front. But at this moment, please take a moment to silence all your electronic devices. Thank you and enjoy.
Thank you. Thank everyone for coming. I appreciate that everybody's here for the Dawn or Doom Symposium. In the first talk, Jennifer Neville talked about a lot of really great things, and I think hers kind of reflected on the dawn. In this one, we'll talk about a little bit of doom and dawn. Because let's face it, being bad is most of the time better than being good, or at least more fun. All right.
I'm completely operational, and all my circuits are functioning perfectly.
So today I'll integrate a lot of sort of sound bites and things like that from past things, and they're to inspire a little bit of question. And here we have our Darwin robot that's in a picture and kind of an ominous look. Down here we have the same Darwin robot, which looks a lot smaller when it's not projected on the big screen. Now, as you might think, or you may not think, because the doom part of this, the Darwin right now is scanning all of your faces. It's registering them with the National Crimes Database and seeing if anybody in here is a fugitive from justice. Now, you think I'm joking, but no, I'm just kidding. Actually, I'll tell you the real answer to that at the end. Okay, I'm Eric Matson, as I said. My research is in robotics and a lot of specific applications. Today I thought about presenting and just coming up here and talking about kinematic models and other things that would put you to sleep rather quick. But I thought we'd talk about something a little more fun, a little more topical, and a little more from the cultural side of robotics. Okay, the big question here is, in the past, robots really haven't been a direct part of our life. So, will they become a direct part of our life? Now, here's a couple of pictures. And being Purdue's a land-grant university, the first picture is an agricultural robot out tending a row crop field. And the second one's one of my former grad students working with one of our flying robots. So as robots become more integrated with humans, we have to be able to make some decisions on whether that use and integration with robots will make our lives safer, easier, and better. And can the robots do things that we can't do? Now, before we start this, and before we talk about the robots, let's talk about technology in general. I like to talk about this, and I travel all over the world, but the thing is, if we look at our cell phone, if we look at something common, probably everybody in here has a cell phone, and probably almost everybody has a smartphone. But 20 years ago, when I was 6, I would never thought anybody... just to see if anybody's listening, I would have never thought I could reach out and touch and connect with anybody in the world. 10 years ago, I never thought I could start a revolution, and I'm talking about sort of the Arab Spring, by using Twitter feeds. We think about the way we use technology and its impact on people, and that intersection of people and technology, and it's pretty fascinating what can actually happen. So the question I want to ask here for all of you. And today, I'm going to ask you a lot of questions. And the people in front, I feel very sorry for you because I can see you in the light and I will ask you questions. 20 years from now, what's possible? Now, if we look at the bottom here, once again, I'll shamelessly use Google because everybody knows it. But Google, in the last year, has spent billions of dollars in robotics. Google also controls information about a great number of you and a great amount of information. If you put those two together in 20 years, what can happen? Really good things? Maybe really bad things.
Well, I don't think there is any question about it. It can only be attributable to human error. This sort of thing has cropped up before, and it has always been due to human error.
Now, that's the HAL 9000. Most of you, if you've ever seen the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey or 2010, the follow-up, A Space Odyssey, these are pretty ominous looks at sort of the use of artificial intelligence and its interaction with humanity. What happens in the first movie? Basically, the robot or the robotic spaceship kills all the astronauts. It's a homicidal robot, which that's a bad thing for humanity, right? So we want to look at, does this make, and this interaction and this closeness with robotics make us safer Or will it make us more risk, having more exposure, and having more problems? Even such, the point is looking at the giant level of doom that we may inflict upon ourselves or with the robots through what we see in popular culture and movies. So we'll take a look at both sides of the issue.
I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
So what happens? This is a provocative topic, right? We're going to talk about some things, and there's been some news releases this week about some of the things I would talk about. We want to look at thinking computers. Now, if you look at this robot here, the Darwin, and you look at your cell phone and your laptop, they all share many common features. So a robot, in many cases, is not too much differently than other devices. It has wireless capability, it has a CPU, it has an operating system. It's really not that much different than your iPhone or your Android or whatever you use. So we want to look at this. Are thinking computers the bride of a dawn future? Are they going to help us and make our lives wonderful and happy and blissful? Or are they the harbinger of dooms, or harbinger of doom for the human race? Will the robots rule the world and us? Now, some people probably would like both. Some people would like neither, but probably it would be nice to have a common middle point. Now, the goals today, I'm not going to give you answers because, frankly, we don't know any answers. So I'm not going to tell you whether it's dawn or doom, but I will kind of give you what I think we do to get ready for it. I want to make you think, and my job today is to make you aware of the world around you. I go all over the world looking at different kinds of robots and their capability in AI, and there's, frankly, some pretty neat stuff out there, but there's also some pretty scary stuff. And finally look at how technology will have impact on your life, okay? Not just your cell phone, but some of you probably have robotic vacuum cleaners. In the near future, we'll have robotic lawnmowers. You might have a robotic entity that will take care of an elderly person in your family, maybe something else, okay? For those of us over the age of probably 25 that grew up in the era of the Cold War, they always had this thing out there called the Doomsday Clock, right? Some of us remember that. What was the Doomsday Clock? The Doomsday Clock was this representation, and we see it up here, that said, how close were we to midnight? And they would have these sort of, in the bottom graphic you see, and it's kind of tough to read, but all these times on this kind of scale. And the whole point of it was to say at any given point in time, how close are we to midnight? Well, what happens at midnight? It's not New Year's Eve, right? At midnight is Armageddon, right? That's when all the bombs go off. That's when everything's bloated. And during the Cold War, considering that the US and Russia both had enough nuclear weapons to blow up the world like 11 times, it probably wasn't going to end very well for anybody. Now, the question I ask you today is, do we need the same thing for technology? Do we need a kind of a measure that everybody understands and can see that would say, what's our reality? Do we have a new Cold War? And that Cold War is with the artificial intelligence that surrounds us. Because as Dr. Neville said when she was up here before, you don't even know all the stuff that's around you probably, unless you're very attuned to it, but everything you do with banking and telecommunications, all of these things are governed and run by artificial intelligence, or a lot of them are. Even Microsoft. How many of you use Microsoft Word? Probably everybody. How many people hate it when you go to the next line and it automatically makes the first letter capital? I hate that. But that's a basic form of AI. All right. So let's look at the bright side. Let's look at the bright side, and then we'll look at the dark side. When we look at humans and robots working and living in the same space, there's a lot of potential risks, but there's a lot of rewards. In the near term, and this is talking about now, and really it's not even the near term, it's things we're already doing. Simple robots can remove us from harm's way. Now, not for all of us. We work at a university and we work in a safe place, but we've been working with the University Fire Service for the last couple of years, doing firefighting robots. So there are things here that are even happening as of now. But there are a lot of dangerous and undesirable jobs. If we look at military jobs, police jobs, manufacturing was probably the first big application area for robotics. A lot of undesirable jobs have been already replaced. Robots have taken over many dangerous or tedious things in assembly, production, and manufacturing, and they'll do a lot more. Soon, robots will take us out of danger for firefighting, police work, military, and not in all cases, but they'll take out the most dangerous parts and put a robot in harm's way because, let's face it, nobody cares if the robot gets killed but you do care if there's a human fatality. Some robots are already in this role. So in this presentation, I'll demonstrate current research at Purdue and some of the things we're doing, but we'll also talk about some fun topics that hopefully will make you think, right? Now, let's also look at the dark side. And I've got a shameless quote right here from Star Wars. You know, fear is the path of the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering, and that's the dark side. Well, what's our future? If we look at doom is pretty bleak, right? So what we really have here is a continuum between the nicest part and the worst thing that could possibly happen. So it's probably somewhere in the middle, right? Now, when we talk about this today, I don't want to just talk simply about, you know, a robot showing up at my house and, you know, being like RoboCop and shooting up everything and blowing everything up. That's a possibility. But the reality is there's lots of ways robotic technology can help us and hurt us. I've already talked about manufacturing, but we'll talk about a risk to jobs. Okay? There's a lot of ways we can be integrated but also hurt. So what's the risk to number of jobs employing humans? Will humans become obsolete? Will we make ourselves obsolete by making machines so intelligent that we no longer, it's not that we're like replacing them so we can have free time, it's they become better than us so we're unemployable. Is that a possibility? And in some cases it is. It's already happened. Okay? Let's look at an example. Now, when I first came to Purdue about 6 years ago, I came before in the summer and I did this program called Elder Hostel, which I don't know that much about it, but it looked like a lot of retired people that come to Purdue and they travel around for a couple of days and look at all these fantastic things that are in research that are going on. I gave a presentation about robotics, and one of the people at the end, one of the guys held up his hand and raised and said, well, have robots put a lot of people out of work? And I said, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, I worked in a factory for many years, and all the robots came in, automated the enterprise, and then all of us went out the door. I said, yeah. So I did a little research. I never thought about it too much, but I did a little research, and if we look at the impact, we always had controversy about North American Free Trade Agreement putting a lot of people out of work. And reality is, if you look at especially industrialized countries like Japan, France, South Korea, the US, robots have put way more people out of work than moving work to another country, whether the country's China or Vietnam or Mexico or Canada or anything else. So we've already seen an impact to human security in the form of economic security. Okay. In the future, and pretty soon we'll go to pictures and fun stuff versus all these words. I have to use a lot of words in the start of the speech because you'll go to sleep and late if I use them, so we have to use pictures and bright, fuzzy things later. In the future, as robots become more intelligent, what kind of special challenge to humanity will they present? What will they challenge us to do? Currently, humans are engineering their own obsolescence. Now, what I'd like to do today is I'd like to make this interactive. Does anybody think we're engineering our own obsolescence? Are we making machines? Are we making things brighter, faster, smarter than we are? Sure, think about that a little bit. Especially if you're in the field of AI or if you're in the field of that creates some of this technology. Are we purposely creating the next evolution of humanity that doesn't include us? These are questions, I'd like to take credit for these two questions, but they're not mine. These are questions that people have posed, and in sort of a generic way, I'm re-asking them. What does this do to us? What do these intelligent robots, you know, the little robot here, or any other robot, or this intelligence potentially do to us? Not today, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. Right. Now, let's look at some positive things. This is a firefighting robotic project we did in our lab. And this is a robotic fire. This is a robotic inclusion in a fire in Hoopeston, Illinois. This fire was so big, it's about 3 blocks long and 1 block wide, the building. It's a 100-year-old structure full of used tires, and it's made of bricks and steel. No firefighter ever wants to go in there. But the structure is so large that there's no way with current technology you can get in there. This robot can, and it can pull all the hose in there to put all the fires out in the middle of the fire. If we look at fire service, one of the most dangerous things you can do is go into a large structure fire. The large structure fire is the one that collapses. And if we look in Indiana, that's where most of the fatalities have been historically. So this one, if we look at kind of the scorecard, down at the bottom I put this scorecard down there, and my analysis is we have to make a choice. Is this securing humans or putting humans at risk? And in this case, this robot probably is doing a better job at securing humans. Now, a question we always get is, well, aren't you putting a firefighter out of work? No, because in this particular instance, a firefighter has to sit out there and control the robot. So the firefighter's happier because he's not running in the fire pulling a hose, waiting for the building to collapse. All the firefighter's doing is sitting out there and playing somewhat of something that looks like a video game. Okay? Next. Now, this is a cool project we have funded here at Purdue by the National Science Foundation, and it deals with flapping wing robots. Now, there's a few labs around the country that do this kind of thing, and the inspiration is like a dragonfly. You have this nice little pretty, very elegant flapping wing robot that's sort of challenged by some of the current technologies like batteries and weight and things like that. But what's it for? Now, this just shows a picture that we created, but if we look at it, what's something like this really for? Well, let's look at the basics of it, and this is just a picture from the lab. You know, the robot actually running. So it is real. We have built it. It doesn't quite fly yet because the battery technology really doesn't exist to make it light enough to get in the air and overcome its weight. But what's it used for? Why does the Air Force Research Labs want something like this? Well, because how many of you notice when a dragonfly comes and sits on your windowsill, looks in your window and stares at you for 4 hours? Probably none of you. How many of you look at, maybe some of you do, because I guess you're very attenuated into insects. How many of you wonder when a fly lands on your body and bites you, or a mosquito, you might swat at it, but what if that was a robot that could take a DNA sample from you and transmit it back? What if that dragonfly that landed on your windowsill was actually something with a high-def camera that was filming everything inside your house? Think about the surveillance things we can do. Now, this is actually, I think they consider it 601 research in the military, which means it's probably 30 years from being fieldable. But think about the implications. So in this one we score, it's both securing humans in the fact that if I'm on the good side of the surveillance, it's great for me. If it's surveilling me, then it's not so great for me because you can get in and infiltrate in any number of ways with this kind of robot. Okay, the next one. As robots and intelligent actors take over human decision making, and this is sort of the intersection point where it gets a little crazy. We've already given up, in a lot of ways, decision making to intelligent algorithms. Where's one place in the world we've given up a lot of our decision making to intelligent algorithms? Stock market. Anybody own stocks? Well, you can see what happens. And it's happened before. That's why they put governors on not being able to sell, or if things get too crazy, it won't melt down the entire economic system in 30 seconds. So the advantage will be capability and capacity to reason faster. Now, our brains are a remarkable machine, but if we look at some of the computing technology available, we can't think faster, especially in specific cases. The next one is make more rational decisions. Now, Professor Neville talked about this earlier. Some people denote that maybe intelligence is based on rationality. Well, what's the basic form of rationality? If you look at some of the common definitions, rationality means we make a decision that's in the best interest of ourselves. Now, do we always do that here at Purdue? As humans, do we always make the most rational decision? All you have to do is come to Purdue on Saturday morning, look at Breakfast Club, and realize there's a whole raft of irrational decisions going on there. Not that it's not fun, but it's probably not in your best interest to get up at 6 o'clock on Saturday morning and drink a 24-pack of Natty Light. But it may be fun. Now, I guess it depends on what your rationality is. Robots and machines also can factor out emotional and humanistic thinking. We tend to, even if we're a very bad person, tend to have some concern over humanity around us. Maybe not this person, but person A is not somebody we care about, but person B is. You can completely tune that out in the rational thinking of a robot. In its own self-preservation, it doesn't have to think about humans of anything but a threat. Right? Now, one thing I like or one thing I think it's funny because we work in a university environment, if we think about robots in everyday human jobs, making decisions, policy, and judgments over humans, what will be the tactical and strategic effects and long-term outcomes of that ubiquitous intervention? Now, I look at this in terms of what do we replaced all of the faculty at Purdue with robots. They could probably, get up and project PowerPoint slides from their head. They could think about a lot of things. Maybe the research wouldn't be as creative, but they probably would cost a lot less long-term than faculty. Now, I'm not saying we should get rid of all the faculty because that would be bad for all of us, especially us that are faculty, right? But think about if we switched from a Professor Einstein to a Professor Terminator. Now, for the students, the cost of failure would be really high. You don't do that assignment, to terminate a robot just would take you out. But think about the rational decision makings and how little, other than getting the highest score in optimization, how you would feel in being treated by your professor. I would say Professor Terminator probably wouldn't be the most touchy-feely, humanistic, fun professor to have. Maybe Einstein wasn't either. I don't know. I never had a class from him. Okay. So the next thing, what is the nature of the human-robotic relationship? Okay. Probably some of you have heard Asimov's rules for robotics. Anybody ever heard Asimov's rules for robotics? Okay. What is the basic tenet of it? The basic idea of Asimov's rules for robotics is the robot's never going to hurt a human. Now, is that true? Do all the robots that we currently create, manufacture, put out in the field, do they just say, oh, nope, not going to hurt the humans? Well, if you look at the old Predator drone, the Predator drone's not exactly making that decision and saying, nope, not going to fire the Hellfire missile. I'm just going to back off on this one and go take a scenic flight over some mountain range. It doesn't happen that way. The robot has a mission, it has a set of tasks, it has a set of goals, and it's going to try to accomplish that. Now, maybe in the future, maybe if it has more humanistic thinking, maybe it won't make that decision, but it won't necessarily be the rational one the way we think about rationality. Okay? So what if robots take on offensive roles with overwhelming firepower superiority? We're already very close to this. If you look at current military investment, a lot of what, because I work in this area, a lot of military investment is looking at autonomous vehicles, autonomous trucks, autonomous tanks, not only here, but in Japan, in South Korea, in Russia, in Central Asia, a lot of countries are looking at autonomous firepower. And that's pretty... Now, if you've ever seen the movie War Games, probably everybody's seen the movie War Games, and I shamelessly bring up lots of movie quotes and things, but the movie War Games was also about that, having the computer whopper deciding the fate of humanity based upon simulations of a chess game. In this case, securing humans or putting humans at risk, once again, both. Now, why is that? Well, if you have all the weapons on your side, it's probably securing your future. If they're on the other side, it's putting you at massive risk. Okay? The next thing, as humans and robots become intermingled, will the barriers between them be reduced? Now, if we look at technology today, and we look at not only sort of the things about robots and humans as two completely separate individuals, you also have a lot of people now that are working on, and there's a great, very famous guy from England that he and his wife, for an experiment, both built an interface that he plugged into his nervous system that he could move his hand and control a robotic hand over here by impulses from his nervous system. Now, how he ever got his wife signed on this to do it, because she's not a professor, but she did it too, but they could actually make gestures to each other with an interface, and he had a little chip embedded into his arm that could also transmit all of his thoughts to move a hand. So we can actually integrate human and non-human tissue into make these kind of devices. At some point, what distinguishes a human from a non-human device? This is actually one of the really big ethical questions going on. And if you look at a lot of returning war veterans, and a lot of people that are missing a leg or an amputee or something like that, a lot of them are being fitted with very advanced robotic prosthesis. At some point, though, there's a question, well, what makes you human? What makes you a robot? Now, there's a lot of implications to that, depending on religious beliefs, civic beliefs, human beliefs. And we won't get into those today because that's a topic for a completely different discussion. But we need to look at that. At what point do you have that intersection and overcome it? If we look at what's happened in the past, such as with religious, racial, ethnic, and other barriers between humans, those barriers have, in many cases, decreased. Now, in some cases, they still exist, but in many cases, they've decreased. What's going to happen in the future? If we look at this, once again, securing humans and also putting humans at risk. Now, these are my opinions. You can form your own opinion, right? Now, this week, I know a lot of things were sent out, and I've gotten a lot of emails and I've had a lot of comments about this. Now, I'd like to also say this was my idea, but I'm stealing once again from somebody else who wrote a book. But it makes for a very bright and interesting debate. And the reason I bring this up is I teach an introduction to robotics class here at Purdue, and every semester in the first lecture I'll ask the students, who would want to marry a robot? And there's always, out of 20 or 30 people, there'll be one person going, I would. And normally just because they want to be different than everybody else, and they haven't thought it through. But most people look at me like I've just landed from another planet. Then I ask them at the end of the semester, and we have the last lecture is always a debate, and I say, okay, let's talk about it again. And it becomes a little different to them because now they've seen the possibilities. Not that everybody wants to marry a robot, but they at least can debate it and not call me crazy. Well, what will be the effects of that debate and decision? So let's look at that a little bit. The big question, so I'll ask you, and since I've had a chance not to talk to 20 people, but a much bigger group here, would you marry a robot? And most of you are probably going, please move on and don't talk about this. But now I'm not saying I'm for it, and I'm not saying I'm against it, because it seems like a ridiculous notion, because we look at robots here, like our little, very cheap, Darwin, here's Darwin. Darwin's cheaper than a wedding. And we have a little quad rotor you can buy for $300 online on Amazon. Hey, that's a pretty cheap wedding. That's a pretty cheap mate. Cuts down on dating costs. But if you showed up at your parents' house with a quad rotor, they would probably put you in the funny house or something, right? Now, let's look at the pop culture view of this. In the future, will it be different? What's the difference between a human and a robot? Is it intelligence? Is it morphology? Is it the evidence of a soul? What is it? In this movie, it kind of showed you had a guy that was very lonely and apparently had some bad relationships. I watched this movie on the way to Korea, and I was kind of in and out, so I didn't catch everything. But I get the idea, but as I'm doing this, I'm all of a sudden, finding myself oddly attracted to Siri on my iPhone. No, I'm just kidding about that. In fact, I can't use Siri. We don't talk very well. But if you look at this, is it possible? Can somebody have a relationship with an inanimate object that has intelligence? And in this case, it showed in this movie that, at least in the idea of it is plausible, right? Now, if we look at this first, this is a quote. Are these people who can establish relationships with other human beings, are they by any chance people who write about love and sex with robots? Now, this is a quote from a guy named David Levy, who wrote a book called Love and Sex with Robots. And it's stolen, or it's taken, I say stolen, that's bad, from Scientific American. So this was actually not just somebody that's putting something out on a blog. It was blessed by Scientific American. And it talks at the future of humans marrying robots, because there's a plausible nature of this that comes out in 50 years. This may be a question we examine. Now, a lot of people are horrified by this idea. And frankly, there's some very interesting cases on both sides. But look at the social effects of something like government regulation that might make it plausible. And I'm not trying to convince you that it's right. But I was over in China last year, and one of the guys was telling me that lives there, he goes, because of the one-child policy, he goes, there's now something like 30 million more men of marrying age than there are women in China. And this is something that he pulled out, and he showed me a quote. What do we do? There's not enough. So he goes, and he was making the joke that he goes, I need to find a robot to marry because there's not enough other people, and he has to go somewhere else, go to another country, go to someplace else to find that. So he says, robot would be cheaper, and I like technology, so I'd rather do that. So now that's kind of a joke, but the bottom line is there are effects of social things that have happened around the world that might make people at least think about it. So would you marry a robot? What if you had the Clooney bot or the Jolie bot? All of a sudden, it looks a little better than if you're marrying the quad rotor or Darwin here. And Darwin's kind of cute, but he's just not marriage material, all right? So if you had Clooney bot model 1742 version 2 or Jolie bot model 10 version 1, what'd you think about it? If you talked to somebody that looked like George Clooney, or you met them in a bar, at church, at Purdue, wherever you frequent, and you met them, and you couldn't distinguish that they were between a human and a robot, they passed the Turing test, would it be plausible? Maybe, Now, think about it from the choice of securing humans or putting humans at risk. Once again, if we had the chance or the ability to marry a robot, what happens? Well, if every single one of us went out and married a robot around the world, it would sort of be the end of the human race, right? We'd have a really big problem in reproduction and from the basic biological functional continuance of our race. But maybe that's not so bad. Some people probably would say, oh, that's good, less humans is better, Earth will heal or whatever, but there's probably functional pluses and minuses no matter how you spin it. But it's something to think about.
It is your destiny.
Maybe it is. I don't know. From Arnold, maybe he thinks it's your destiny. But when we think about something like this, when we think about something that's controversial, I think what we're going to have to really consider and be faced with is we're going to have to think about a lot of controversial subjects with the technology that invades our life. And I use the word invades now because a lot of this technology is slowly creeping in and invading our life. Okay? Now, will the future be wonderful with humans having maximal free time while the robots work? I don't know. If you look at employment rates in some countries around the world right now that are highly automated, there's a lot of young people that don't have jobs. Go to Spain, 25% unemployment rate for young people, which actually is probably more realistic to be around 35. A lot of the factories there, and I've seen some of these, a lot of robots running in there. Good or bad? Maybe it's good and bad. Will it be a dire, bleak future as shown in many movies and pop culture outlets? Now, most of the time, people see robots and they come up to me and go, I was expecting things like Star Wars, would speak 25,000 languages, it can do everything, it acts like a human. Robots just aren't there yet. But who knows in the future if that will happen. Okay? How will robots affect our lives? How they will affect our economic and security perspectives in the future? We don't know.
Will I dream?
Will they dream? I don't know. Will you dream? Everybody know what that is? That's the question not the HAL 9000, but the SAL 9000 asks in the follow-up movie. When the robot's taken down, will it dream? Now, what does the future hold? If we look at robots, we look at humans, we look at the intersection between those two things. Should we be ever vigilant? Should we say, let's stop working on robotics now and never do anything more? Because there's a giant threat to our humanity. Or should we manage this situation? And I believe that we should manage the situation. Like I said, I'm not going to give you answers. I'm going to give you unglorified, undignified opinions from one lowly professor. But the reality is we have this dawn versus doom. We have these two ends of the spectrum. And in somewhere in the middle probably lies the answer, as it does with most things. Now, I'll pull out one more, just absolutely simple, but I think really fitting piece to this. And if we look at the end of the movie Wizard of Oz, we see the ruby slippers. For those people that haven't seen The Wizard of Oz, you know what I'm talking about. For those that haven't, it's a great movie. Go take a look. But at the end, the one thing that Dorothy finds out is that the entire time, all she had to do is click her heels together 3 times and say, there's no place like home, and she goes home, right? She had the answer the entire time. The one thing I would say for us is we have the answer the entire time. Because as humans, we're the ones that are going to create these robots. We're the ones that are going to manage them. And we have to manage it so it doesn't get out of control, they don't overcome, or they don't do things that we can't control anymore.
It's puzzling. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like this before.
And that's true. And if that doesn't work, all we do is pick up the robot and we just turn it off. All right. Thanks, everybody.